Hey, this is Kyle, and today we're going to take a look at my home studio. Here's a view of my desk. Normally, if I'm just doing some basic things, I'll use a Chromebook. But if I'm doing video editing or some studio production work, then I'll use the computer. One thing that a lot of people will point out is going, dude, are those cans holding up that shelf? It's like, yeah, sorry, it's the D&D game crafter nerd in me, where I'm like, why go get, fancy aluminum tubing when I could drink some Diet Pepsi or whatever and get the same thing? So yes, I'm reusing some of that. But going through this video, I'm going to show you my signal chain with the computer, how everything is set up, and then show you some equipment I'm not using anymore. A couple of years ago, I had my home studio set up in a similar but different way. I took it down, and then recently put it back together a couple months ago to finish the new album I was working on. But some things going on right here. Obviously, I have a power strip, but I have some audio monitors. I have a TV monitor. I use that HDMI output from the computer. These are wireless for my guitar that I can use. I have a dog controller interface and then a computer keyboard. So let me get this turned on and then I'll show you some of the details here. Let's start with the input. I have an Allen & Heath Zed10 USB interface. And the preamps on this for microphones or instruments are very, very, very clean. So I'll have the microphone that's sitting next to it. I have a mic stand set up and a cord. All I need to do is plug it in. I have some basic settings, hit the record button, and I'm ready to go. Next to it, I have kind of a secret weapon in a way. I took this to Nashville, and in the studio, the engineer was saying, "What is that?" I know the brand, but didn't expect this little tube distortion box. I use it more like a preamp, I guess. Didn't realize how much it would kick the front end of an amp, so it worked really well to record. And I'll use it to go direct and get a little tone color with instruments on the tracks I recorded at home for the new album. I think I used this in almost all of them. I think one song I went direct with the guitar into the Zed10 and just use the preamp and then use some sort of virtual amp. Not always a big fan of the virtual amps in my DAW. Usually I use them to add just a little bit of color as opposed to distortion or something. I tend to prefer other types of distortions than virtual amp distortion. But I do have to say I did use the Black Star to add some grit on some guitar tracks. Been using Reason around 8 or 9 years, I guess. I used to use some version of what Cakewalk became before that, and back in the mid-90s, I got my first version of Cakewalk, which was MIDI only, and then went to Cakewalk Home Studio around 2000. But I really like Reason. What sold me on Reason is some of the videos that they had. I was trying to choose between Reason and Ableton. And at the time, Reason just seemed to be so much simpler. Worked really well with my interface. There was a little latency, but using the right drivers, it all worked out very well. Whenever I got Reason, I had a different MIDI controller. And then I got this. I got the Nektar Panorama 4, P4. I love it. It's one of those choices. And as a musician, I'm not one of those people that just sinks in tons and tons of money into music. You know, the old joke of, I'm going to show up at a $100 gig with $10,000 of equipment. I try not to be that person. If you watch my unboxing video for the SY1 pedal, I made a comment that I just don't buy a whole lot of gear. So what sold me on the Nektar is it really integrates excellently with Reason, and nearly everything inside the program you can access right here on the controller. You have a motorized fader, You have like a little mini mixer with some other controls. You can access panning. You have a control panel and then some other options in addition to the keyboard and the sample pads. But to me, whenever you get in that creative mindset, reaching for a mouse or reaching for a keyboard is a way to pull you out of that creative kind of mode. You know, instead of clicking through patches with your mouse, you can just hit a button an inch or a couple centimeters away from where your finger is on the keyboard and go through those patches in a much more natural way. And having this really helped me again be more creative and get into what I was creating as opposed to jumping out and trying to more objectively think about what is it I'm trying to do with the music, what is it with this project. A big part of what I liked about Reason 2 is it has SSL mixers built into it. But whenever you get to the interface and with the screen to go in and set compression, compression is one of those things when you're working on a project that you can get so into the math and the theoretical aspect of compression. Having the Nektar here, it was so nice to really rely on my ear. So as I'm adjusting, you know, like a ratio or a time release setting or whatever the case is, to use my ear instead of to think objectively like, oh, do I want this kick drum to pump or do I want this bass to do this or that? You made choices from a different aesthetic point of view. What I like about my setup is that that encouragement with the devices I have is it helps me to really think about what do I want it to sound like as opposed to, you know, someone coming in that you, like if you're a sculptor and you hire them to come and chisel off hunks of granite or something, you know, where that person might not know the vision of the artist, you know, you get a whole lot more specific control. Along with that, on my keyboard for this computer, I have all the hotkeys. It makes me feel like I'm one of those really cool Pro Tools producers or people in their studio, but this is set up for a reason. Going from input from the Zed to the production and the output, this is a very efficient setup for me. Something that I like is obviously the monitors, but with the TV that I use as a computer monitor and with an HDMI connection, I can use those TV speakers. And especially on a song with bass, on some of the new songs I have coming out, especially Close and Forgot, there's a lot of the sub bass, not necessarily trap style sub bass, but you know, the low bass. And a problem I was having that a lot of producers do is if someone hears that song with lower fidelity speakers, how in the world are they going to hear that bass? And usually what you do is you add distortion. And distortion is like what makes a regular guitar sound like a rock guitar, where it's this growling beast. And that works to an extent, but it depends on your bass source. So I was able to do some sound design using the speakers of the TV, which don't have that low-end bass response that you get out of studio monitors or other speakers or subwoofer or something. I could do some sound design and make sure that the bass is able to be heard on different speakers. And once you get it set up, it's pretty easy once you tackle some of the frequency aspects of going, oh, these types of devices are going to have these types of speakers and so on. It sounds way more complicated than what it might actually be. Let me show you some of the equipment I don't use anymore. Here's a cool tip for gear, especially if you have your home studio. Get a baker's rack. They're pretty cheap. I have some merch and other things, and I have a big hot mess of cords underneath here. But this rack slides, I think they might call these a kitchen rack at different places, but it's just wide enough for a 19-inch rack gear to fit very well. So this top piece of gear is an ART tube preamp. It's made for microphones and instruments. And actually when the studio I was at in Nashville, High Ridge Studio, they had one of these that they would use from time to time. So I felt pretty cool that I had some gear that a studio in Nashville would use from time to time. I used to use that all the time. I used to use it for all the microphone things I would record. And then if I was recording an acoustic that had a pickup in it, I would go direct into that. And something about even though the tubes in this aren't the best, it still had a really, really good sound, and it didn't give too much color. Obviously, a tube preamp is going to have a little bit of color to it, but the options and things on it worked out really, really well. The main reason why I didn't hook it back up is just to keep things extremely simple. For this new album, I was trying to change my process a little bit. So, how I produced drums previously, some of my thinking, the conceptual arrangement of the sound, and how I wanted it to fill the space, like if you were listening on headphones and whatnot. I just wanted to change up my process and do things a little bit more directly and focus more on the sound. The other piece of gear is a Behringer headphone amp. And I actually used to have my sound output going directly to that. And then from there, I'd have it go to the studio monitors I use now, some other cheaper, kind of like old computer speakers that didn't have good bass response, and then headphone outputs. I have some studio monitor headphones that have a real good flat response. And then if someone was here tracking vocals or something else and they needed to listen in headphones, then I had a place where they could, adjust their volume and things like that. And again, the only reason more so on the headphone amp why I didn't want to use it is I wanted to keep my setup very, very simple. When I came up with the idea to use soda cans to hold up that shelf, I was using some microphone boxes before, and I realized I had a soda sitting there. I was like, hey, that's about the same height, and I could just, use a bunch of those. Trying to keep things simple and not a whole lot of extra clutter on my desk, so I could put things away very quickly and very neatly. I decided, hey, I'm not going to use the headphone amp, and then I thought, well, with the preamp, if I ever want to use it again on a project, either of these pieces of gear are right here, and I can easily plug them in and make use of them if that's what I want to do. If you have any questions about why I do anything the way I do, or if you're thinking that I left something out, or there was some obvious thing that you thought you had to have in a studio but I didn't go over, just let me know. Leave a comment and we'll have a little conversation about it. I've been recording on my own since 1992. In college, a professor was getting rid of a 4-track because he had acquired an 8-track. This is back in the cassette days. And since then, I've been working off and on my own recording. I've done some session work and recorded in Nashville in November of 2019. So those are some exciting things about recording. And talking to the engineer in Nashville about recording, when it comes to guitar, I've always been a type where if someone hits record, it doesn't really bother me too much. Every once in a while, I might get distracted because the setting's different or there might be some noise present that I'm not used to whenever I go to play. But in Nashville, I talked to the engineer about performing and recording, and he said something I never really thought about, that recording is the most important performance because you're trying to capture that energy in the absence of the energy of a normal performance. Because we were talking about people go to record vocals or something. We talked about how some classic rock bands would famously have parties in a studio to have all that energy so they could just rock it out. And it's real interesting to think about how can you do that all by yourself in a vocal booth, no audience to feed off of. You have to really conjure up all those feelings. That was kind of neat to think about. And it's something obvious when someone points it out. Going through recording and stuff over time, it was neat to have a brand new thought when it comes to recording and the process and everything related to that. So as always, if you see something creative online, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, leave comments, and support people who are trying to make this world a little bit more creative.